Hi everyone, thanks for joining me here on JKD Handmade. For this tutorial, I'll be showing you how to work up this crochet raglan off-the-shoulder sweater. This pattern is for sizes from extra small to 5XL. For this tutorial, I worked up a size medium. For the materials, you will need yarn. I used a category 3 light worsted double knit. You may also use a category 2, which is a 4-ply or sport weight, or a category 4, which is a worsted weight or Aran weight. Now this is 100% acrylic and each skein is 100 grams. The recommended hook on the yarn label is a 4mm hook. For a size medium that I had worked up, I used 5 skeins, which is 500 grams. You will also need hooks, 2 of them. The first hook is a 4mm hook, which is the recommended hook on the yarn label for all the ribbings. And then I used a hook that was 2 sizes larger than the recommended hook for the rest of the sweater. You will also need a pair of scissors, a measuring tape, stitch markers, and a yarn or a wool needle. With this pattern being a raglan, you will need the sizing chart, which I do have right here on YouTube on my store page. Now I've taken the sizing chart and I've also put in the link to the video tutorial, the associated video tutorial, so that you will always have this on file. You will have the sizing chart together with the video tutorial link. For those of you that work from tutorials, make sure that you are checking out the chart only sizing chart, because that is much cheaper than the full written pattern. Okay, so let's get on with this tutorial. For round 1, we'll work a foundation single crochet. Form a slip knot using the larger of the 2 hooks. In my case, I'm using a 6mm hook. Chain 2. That's 1, 2. Into the second chain from the hook, insert your hook, pull up a loop. You have 2 loops on your hook. Yarn over and go through only 1 loop on your hook. You formed a little chain right here, and this will be the start of our next stitch. Yarn over and go through 2 loops on your hook. That way you formed your first stitch. Then insert your hook into that little chain that we formed earlier on, going through both loops from that chain as I have done here. Pull up a loop. You've got 2 loops on your hook. Yarn over and go through only 1 loop on your hook. That way you formed a little chain, and that will become the start of our next stitch. Yarn over and go through 2 loops on your hook. Now you formed your second stitch. Insert your hook into the little chain that we formed earlier, going through both loops from that chain as I have done here. Pull up a loop, yarn over and go through only 1 loop on your hook. That way you formed a little chain, and that will be the start of our next stitch. Yarn over and go through 2 loops on your hook. Now you formed your third stitch. You'll continue on in this way until you have a length of stitches for round 1. I've continued on with my length of stitches for round 1. Once you have your length of stitches, now we're working according to body measurements. So you will need to fit this length of stitches around your upper chest and around your arms, as I'm showing you in this video clip. When you are fitting round 1, make certain that you are placing this length of stitches along your upper bust and just above the underarm. Your arms are not stretched out and you are not stretching this length of stitches in any way. Hold it firmly without stretching. Make sure that it is not hanging on the body. You want it loose around the body, but definitely not sagging or stretched. Once you've measured out the foundation round, we can go ahead and mark out the separations for our raglan. The first thing that you'll need to do is count the number of stitches that you've worked and fit it into the sizing chart. Now, I actually worked 137 stitches, and that's what fitted around my body. But to fit into the sizing chart, the closest was 140 stitches. So I worked 3 more stitches to fit my foundation round into the sizing chart. This worked out to 140 stitches for my body measurement. On the sizing chart, you will see on the left the numbers in bold. Those are the total number of stitches for round 1. And on the right, the 3 numbers are the separations for the raglan. Now that you've worked out the number of stitches and fitted it into the sizing chart as I have done, I'm working with 140 stitches because that's what fits around my upper body. We'll go ahead and mark off the separations. When marking off the separations, you will use the 3 digits on the right that's in line with the same number of stitches that you've used. When marking off your separations for the raglan, make certain that you start or begin counting from where you've started off round 1 and not from where you've stopped with round 1. So if you look at it here, this is the start of round 1 with the tail end showing at this edge. And then if you look at the other side, that's where I've stopped with round 1, and here's the start of round 1. This is where I'll begin counting. For this pattern, that first stitch that we had started off round 1 with counts as the first stitch. So you'll count on and mark off your separations as shown on the chart. I'm actually working a sample right here so that I can get this entire yoke up on camera and you are able to see much clearly. However, for my actual sweater, I used 140 stitches and I followed the separations as listed next to 140 stitches on the stitch count chart. Now I've marked off my separations. I have 4 of them. It's the sleeve, the front body, the sleeve, and the back body. We will now join both ends to form a ring, but make certain when doing this that you do not twist on round 1. The best way I found to get this done is by laying out round 1 flat on a surface and then making certain that it's not twisted or tangled. Slip stitch to join. Here we have our 4 separations. That's the sleeve, the front body, the sleeve, and the back body. And then we have our corners. At start, that's our first corner. And then we have the second corner, third, and the 4th corner. For this pattern, we'll be using the extended single crochet. Round 2, chain 3. Chain 3 counts as our first stitch, in this case an extended single crochet. Now this is our first corner. We will come back to complete this corner when we are finishing this round. For our next stitch, Insert your hook into the next stitch, pull up a loop. You have 2 loops on your hook. Yarn over and go through 1 loop on your hook. Yarn over and go through 2 loops on your hook. That was an extended single crochet, and that's the stitch we'll be using throughout. Continue on working those extended single crochets until you get to the first stitch marker. I've worked my way to the stitch marker. Here I am at the corner. Remove the stitch marker. Into that stitch marked off, work an extended single crochet, chain 2, and work 1 more extended single crochet into that same stitch. Here you have a corner. Replace your stitch marker into the chain 2 space. Continue on with extended single crochets to the next corner. Once you get to the next stitch marker, work a corner, which is an extended single crochet, chain 2, extended single crochet, replace your stitch marker, just as you had done for the first corner, and then you'll work your way to the next corner. You'll work a corner there, replace your stitch marker, you'll work extended single crochets to the end of the round. I've worked my way to the end of round 2. I've worked extended single crochets throughout round 2. I've also worked my 3 corners and replaced my stitch markers into the chain 2 spaces. To end the round, we need to work this last corner. So into that same stitch from where chain 3 comes out of, work an extended single crochet. Then chain 2, so that's 1, 2, and slip stitch into the 3rd chain from chain 3 to join. So here you formed your first corner. Round 3, turn, slip stitch into that chain 2 space, chain 3 counts as our first stitch. When working this round, it's really important that you work your stitches into these 2 stitches that make up the corners from the previous rounds as well. So you'll work extended single crochets into all your stitches until you get to the first corner. I've worked my way to the first corner. Make certain that you are working your stitches into those stitches that make up the corner from the previous round. Remove your stitch marker. Work a corner into that chain 2 space. So it's an extended single crochet, chain 2, extended single crochet, all into that chain 2 space. Replace your stitch marker into the chain 2 space. Continue on with extended single crochets until you get to your next stitch marker. At the next stitch marker, work a corner into that chain 2 space. Replace your stitch marker into the chain 2 space. Then you'll work extended single crochets to the next stitch marker. You'll work a corner at that stitch marker, and you'll work extended single crochets to the end of the round. I've worked my way to the end of round 3. To complete the round, we need to work the last corner. But before doing so, make certain that you've worked a stitch into that last stitch that makes up the last corner. I'll work an extended single crochet into that last stitch. Now to complete my last corner, I'll work an extended single crochet into the chain 2 space. Then it's chain 2 and slip stitch into the third chain from chain 3. So we've now completed this corner at start. Round 4, turn, slip stitch into the chain 2 space, chain 3 counts as our first stitch. Round 4 is a repeat of round 3. Here we're working extended single crochets into all stitches, and we're working corners into all those chain 2 spaces marked with stitch markers. When you get to the end of the round, complete your last corner and slip stitch to join. I've continued on to complete round 4, so there's only 4 rounds for the yoke. That was the foundation round, which is round 1, then round 2, 3, and round 4. Before moving on to the body, take notice of the yoke. Here you have the sleeve, and that's the back body. So if we look at it here, that's the sleeve on either side, and then it's the front body and the back body. The sleeve separations are slightly shorter than that of the front body and the back body. For round 1 of the body, turn, notice that you are working in the direction of the back body. And on the opposite corner is the sleeve. Okay, round 2. Slip stitch into that chain 2 space, and then it's chain 3. Chain 3 counts as our first stitch. Continue on with extended single crochets along the back body until you get to your next stitch marker. I've worked my way along the back body to the stitch marker. Into that chain 2 space, work an extended single crochet. Then it's chain 3. Now this chain 3 is a joining chain. It is adjustable. You may work a longer chain, keeping in mind that the longer the chain, the looser the fit on the body and the sleeves. Now we'll skip the stitches in between. These stitches make up the sleeve, and we'll join to our next stitch marker with an extended single crochet into that chain 2 space. Here we formed the first armhole space. Continue on with extended single crochets along the front body to the next stitch marker. I've worked my way along the front body to the next stitch marker. Into that chain 2 space, work an extended single crochet. Chain 3, this is your joining chain, and it is the same as the first joining chain. Skip the stitches in between. These stitches make up the next sleeve, and slip stitch into the third chain from chain 3 to join. Here we formed the second armhole space. We'll now work round 2 of the body, chain 2. Chain 2 counts as our first stitch. I've chosen to chain 2 instead of chaining 3 for my first stitch. That's because when working the body, I find that a chain 3 just creates a bigger gap. If you find that it's difficult to find your second chain from chain 2, place a stitch marker into that second chain. That way it will help you when ending the round to join into that second chain. Turn, work extended single crochets into all chains and into all stitches. Continue on to the end of the round. When you get to the end of the round, slip stitch into the second chain from chain 2 to join. I've continued on with my sweater, and as you can see from this video clip, the yoke is really narrow. It's just those 4 rounds that we had worked, round 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then we worked the joining round, which was the round 1 of the body, and we worked round 2. And you can see from here we formed the armhole spaces on either side. And then I went on to repeat round 2 until I got to the required length of my sweater. So you'll repeat round 2 for as many rounds as need be. Keep in mind that you do need to turn after every round. We'll now finish off the bottom edge of the sweater with a ribbing. Before moving on, take notice that the top of the sweater is rather wide and loose, and that's fine. We will at the end get back to this top edge and work a ribbing around this top edge, which will eventually tighten up on this edge. Now for the ribbing along the bottom edge, continuing on from where we've stopped, using the smaller of the 2 hooks, in my case the 4mm hook. Chain 11. Now you may chain as many chains as you'd like to, depending on how wide or narrow you'd like your ribbing. I've chosen to chain 11. Round 1 of the ribbing, into the second chain from the hook, single crochet. Insert your hook into that chain, pull up a loop, yarn over, go through 2 loops on your hook. Continue on with single crochets into the remaining chains. At the end of the round, make certain that you have 10 stitches. For 11 chains, you must have 10 stitches. So it's always 1 stitch less than the number of chains that you've chained. We now need to join this part of the ribbing to the bottom edge of the sweater. So in order to do so, we will slip stitch twice. So here's the first slip stitch. And now for the second slip stitch. Round 2 of the ribbing, turn, skip those slip stitches. So it's 1 and 2, and we'll work our first stitch into that next stitch. Single crochet into the back loop. Continue with single crochets into the back loops only. The back loops are the loops that are away from you. Continue on working those single crochets into the back loops to the end of the round. Make certain that your stitch count always remains the same. Round 3, chain 1 and turn. Into the same stitch from where chain 1 comes out of, work a single crochet into the back loop. Continue with single crochets into the back loops only to the end of the round. Make certain that your stitch count remains the same. We now need to join the ribbing to the bottom edge of the sweater. To do so, we need to slip stitch twice. So into that first stitch, slip stitch, into the next stitch, slip stitch. Round 4, turn, skip those 2 slip stitches. Always skip your slip stitches and you'll work your first stitch into the next stitch. Work single crochets into the back loops only to the end of the round. For the next round, round 5, chain 1 and turn. Now again, you'll continue on with single crochets into the back loops only. Then you'll work those slip stitches and you'll work back up again. All you're doing really is repeating round 2 and round 3 all around this bottom edge of the sweater. I do want to give you a close-up on the joining of the ribbing to the sweater. Take note that that first stitch that you see is pulled into the ribbing. So when joining, always bring your ribbing down. Notice which stitch your ribbing aligns with. That would be the stitch that you would slip stitch into. You would slip stitch into that stitch and into the next stitch. So that was just a little close-up on joining the ribbing to the bottom edge of the sweater. You'll continue on repeating round 2 and round 3 and all the way around the bottom edge of your sweater. I've continued on with the ribbing along the bottom edge of the sweater. You will know when you're done once you've used up all your stitches along the bottom edge of the sweater. You'll notice that the ribbing edges are able to meet. We can now slip stitch these edges to join. When slip stitching, get into your stitch on the one side of the ribbing and then get into the stitch on the opposite side. I always work my slip stitches into the stitches on the inside of the ribbing. Again, get into one stitch, get into your next stitch, pull up a loop and pull it through all those loops on your hook. Continue on with slip stitches to join these ribbing ends. Know that for 10 stitches on your ribbing, you would need to work 10 slip stitches. Once you've joined your ribbing ends, you can fasten off and cut off on the excess yarn. We will now work the sleeves. Remove your stitch markers as you no longer need them. Using your larger of the 2 hooks, in my case the 6mm hook to work the sleeves, attach yarn to the underarm. The stitch pattern is the same as it was for the body. Round 1, chain 2 counts as our first stitch. Work extended single crochets all around the armhole space. I've worked my way to the end of round 1 for the sleeve. To end the round, slip stitch into the second chain from chain 2 to join. Round 2, chain 2 and turn. Work extended single crochets into all stitches to the end of the round. When you get to the end of the round, slip stitch into the second chain from chain 2 to join. I've continued on with the sleeve and all I've done was repeat round 2 until I had worked as many rounds as need be to get me to the required length for my sleeve. Do keep in mind that you will need to work a ribbing at the end of the sleeve. So here I've gone ahead and worked the second sleeve and ribbing just to give you an idea of the length of this ribbing. So it measures around 3 inches or 7.5 centimeters. You'll need to work your sleeve that's 3 inches or 7.5 centimeters shorter than the actual length of your sleeve. Now getting back to the ribbing on the first sleeve, here we're continuing on from where we had stopped. Swap out your hook for the smaller hook. And here we're working the ribbing just as we had done for the bottom of the sweater. The only difference is that we need to tighten up even more on the sleeve because the sleeve is rather wide. So instead of working 2 slip stitches, we'll now be working 3 slip stitches. Chain 11 and work round 1 just as you had done for the ribbing along the bottom edge of your sweater. Always count your stitches, make certain that your stitch count is correct. Here I have 10 stitches. Now to slip stitch along the bottom edge. Here we're working 3 slip stitches to join the ribbing to the bottom edge of the sweater. So we'll work that first slip stitch, the second slip stitch, and the third slip stitch. And these 3 slip stitches will help tighten up on the sleeve ribbing even more. For the next round turn, skip your 3 slip stitches, 1, 2, 3, and work your first stitch into that next stitch. Now you're working the ribbing just as you did for the ribbing along the bottom edge of your sweater, only this time whenever you slip stitch to join the ribbing to the bottom edge of the sleeve, you will slip stitch 3 times instead of 2. Okay, so if you prefer your ribbing not as tight along the bottom edge of the sleeve, you may also alternate between 3 slip stitches and 2 slip stitches. I've continued on. I've completed the ribbing along my sleeve edge. I've also joined both ribbing ends by slip stitching. Notice that the ribbing has tapered off quite a bit. Repeat the same steps for your second sleeve. We will now work the ribbing along the top edge of our sweater. For this sweater, there is a distinct back and front to the sweater. We will need to tighten up slightly along the back to prevent any sagging along the back of the sweater. So the first thing that you need to do is decide which is the back of the sweater. We will first work 1 round of single crochets and then continue on with the ribbing. Attach yarn to the corner along the back of the sweater. I actually lost a video clip, but what I did here was I chained 1 and worked single crochets all along the sweater until I got to this corner of the sweater just before working the back of my sweater. To show you again, here I need to find center back. So here it is. I haven't really counted my stitches. You may count your stitches or eliminate stitches on either side until you get to the exact center back. But here all I've done was really eyeball center back. Now the reason for this is because if you look at our bodies, at the back we've got our shoulder blades, and in between those shoulder blades there's sort of an indentation along our body. So we need to work decreases on the sweater to prevent any sagging that will happen at that indentation between our shoulder blades. I will now mark off points on either side of center back, and in between these points is where our work decreases. So aligning center back with 2.5 inches as I'm doing here, so that way I'm able to get a measurement of 5 inches in total. So that's 2.5 inches on either side of center back. Now if you're working in centimeters, that will be around 13 centimeters in total. So here center back, and on either side of center back I have 2.5 inches, giving me a total of 5 inches. If you're working in centimeters, it's around 6.5 centimeters on either side, giving me a total of 13 centimeters. We'll work decreases in between these points. You can now remove the center stitch marker as you no longer need it. And from this corner, we'll continue on working single crochets until we get to that first stitch marker. Here I am at the first stitch marker. Remove the stitch marker and we'll work our first decrease. Insert your hook into that first stitch, pull up a loop, insert your hook into the next stitch, pull up a loop. You have 3 loops on your hook, yarn over and go through all 3 loops on your hook. Into the next stitch, work a single crochet, and then it's a decrease into the next 2 stitches. Insert your hook into the first stitch, pull up a loop, insert your hook into the second stitch, pull up a loop, yarn over, go through all 3 loops on the hook, and then it's a single crochet followed by a decrease into the next 2 stitches. And all we're doing here is we're alternating between single crochets and decreases to the next stitch marker. So I've worked my way to the next stitch marker. So in between those 2 stitch markers, I've sort of decreased along the back body, or rather tightened up on the back body. Now I'll continue on with single crochets to the end of the round. When you get to the end of the round, slip stitch into your first single crochet to join. We'll now work the ribbing. You can swap out your hook for the smaller hook. In my case, it's the 4mm hook. Chain 7. So here we're working with a much narrower ribbing compared to the ribbing that we've worked along the sleeve edge and bottom edge. You may chain a longer or wider ribbing if you choose. You may go up to a chain of 9. This ribbing is exactly the same as we had done when working the sleeve ribbing, where we had worked 3 slip stitches to join the ribbing to the edge of the sweater. Working 3 slip stitches will tighten up on this sweater. However, you may decide to alternate between 2 slip stitches or 3 slip stitches if you choose. Continue on with your ribbing just as you had done when working the ribbing for the sleeve. you'll work round 1, and then you'll work those 3 slip stitches to join the ribbing to the edge of the sweater. And then it's turn, you'll work round 2 and round 3, and you'll repeat round 2 and round 3 all the way around the top edge of your sweater. I've continued on with the ribbing along the top edge of the sweater. I've also slip stitched along the ends of the ribbing to join. We can now fasten off and cut off on the excess yarn. Now all that's left to do is to weave in all these ends. Using your yarn needle, weave in all your ends into the wrong side of the sweater. Go back and forth into the stitches on the wrong side to lose those ends. Cut off on the excess yarn and repeat for all your tail ends. And that does it for this tutorial. For those of you who are new to my channel and who haven't already, please do consider subscribing. Yes, thank you for watching, and I hope that you enjoyed it.